Quad66. Alright, here it is. It's hard to see, I've already built it up on you. I was too excited, well, maybe not too excited. I was too impatient to do any kind of video before I built it up, but this is the Flywoo board. This is, on paper, an absolute unicorn. The reason it's an absolute unicorn is because it is, and we'll get into this a little bit, it might be 1 to 2S. It's definitely a 2S. Might be a 1 to 2S board. And it is an F405 with an MPU 6000, and it has black box login on it. And, oh, it's got Express LRS built right in. Via UART, not even SPI, via UART. They did everything on paper so well that I was willing to spend $100 on this board and take a roll of the dice on it, even though I didn't expect it to work well because of this board. So the prior Versatile board, the 1S board, it's been relegated to whoop duty. I like whoops, flying inside, but I don't really expect as much. I don't push them as hard. I don't expect as much performance, and so when I had this board, this prior 1S board, it was just kind of throttling the power. It just didn't have the same power as the Tune RC boards. And so I just relegated it to whoop duty, and it works good there. But so, despite that, I rolled the dice on this board and went ahead and got it. And from that point on, after taking an initial look at it, disappointment started setting in, and it has only gotten it's kind of gone downhill from there. So I'll point out the first issue with it. So these are the Tune RC 1002s. These are 22,000 kV. I also got, since I was ordering from Flywoo, I also got some of their 1002s. I got them also in that high kV. They might call this like a 23,000 kV, but it's effectively the equivalent. But I want to show you issue number 1. So on 1S, plug in a battery here. Get that plugged in for you. Give that a second, and now we're going to go ahead and arm this. And we get little twitches. Yeah. Okay. Totally fixable, right? We've all had that, right? Some of the motors are a little hard to start up. So we go into our ESC settings, and we start pushing our ramp up power, startup power, and all that stuff. We max it out. I did that, and it didn't fix it. Tried 24 kilohertz, still helped. It did help more, but still didn't fix it. And it wasn't until I started pushing up the dynamic idle quite high. So on all my boards, I run it at 35, so I think that's like 3,500 RPM. And I had to push this up to like 5 just to get it to the motors to spin fairly consistently. Now it takes off. It's kind of weird. Like once you hit the throttle, it takes off. It doesn't do that thing where like the motor doesn't go and then it flips over, death rolls on you right into the ground. It takes off. So I was almost-ish willing to overlook that until I started just kind of comparing these two back to back. So first, when I built this one up, I actually built it up with the Flywoo Robos. And then I had, on the Tune RC, I had the RCN Power 1002s. And I noticed right off the bat that the Flywoo build wasn't getting that same high pitch kind of shriek on the punch out. Shouldn't call it shriek, doesn't sound that bad. It just wasn't hitting the same frequency of pitch, and which tells me that the RPMs were down. And sure enough, when I put the RPMs up on my OSD, this was maxing out. This one maxes out at around 36,000 RPM, 37,000 RPM, and the Tune RC maxes out around 41,000, 42,000 on that full punch out. So initially I thought, well, is it the motors or something else? I flip-flopped motors, crossed those over, and it persisted where the Flywoo board was only hitting 36,000, 37,000 versus the Tune RC board with the Flywoos was still hitting 41, 42. So I've switched over the motors. It's not a motor issue. I've tried ESC settings. It's not ESC settings issue. And I've tried taking the PID loop out of it. So if I look at the black box, there's not like a weak, just one bad ESC holding them all down. Nope, they're just all consistently there. They're hitting max motor command. And when you spin it up in Betaflight, without any PID loop involved, I can't spot any problems there. What is kind of interesting about it is flight time. It's almost acting like a throttle limit, where on the Flywoo board I pick up some extra flight time, like an extra 20 to 30 seconds versus the Tune RC. But it's just not as fun to fly. Like, the reason this starts to get into the fun territory is because it's got a bit of a kick. It's got a bit of a punch out. And yeah, flight times aren't super long, but who cares? You're like, there's a novelty here. In this size class, you're kind of like, the performance of this size of a quad is sort of a novelty. You're not real, I know, at least I'm not that worried about trying to get 5-minute flights out of it. So I don't care if the flight time's a little too short or a little short. And so, I don't know. So those were kind of like the initial issues. And if it was just that, I'd be like, okay, well, maybe it's just not a 1S board. Let's go ahead and do a 2S. But then that's when you get into the other quirks of the board. So this board is very much built like a Whoop board. So you can see it better here on this example. This is, the layout's the same, where the motor, the big part of the motor tabs, the motor pads to solder, is from the bottom of the board. That doesn't work so great when you're building up open prop builds. It's pretty hard to get a soldering iron down in there on swatch out motors and things like that. You do have these little tabs on the side, and that's how I actually solder these. This is like the early B-Brain brushless version 1, where you kind of have these little tabs on the side that you can solder to. And it kind of works when you get these little skinny wires, but I don't know if that's going to work so well once you get to some reasonable size wires. So that got really tedious really fast, and when I was doing the motor swap, I was just, quality of life on swapping the motors on this Tune RC board is a million times better than on the Flywoo board, because these little tiny solder pads on the side are just, I mean, you can't even see them on the camera. They're so small. That's hard to get onto, and that's just annoying. Now, you could say, why not just flip everything over? Well, the reason you may not just flip everything over is because all the solder pads for everything else, maybe you can see a little better over here, they stuck them in on top. So you don't have solder pads to solder your VTX, and yeah, you could solder on the bottom, wrap the wires around for the VTX and camera. And I may ultimately do that, but I don't know. I don't know if I'm that motivated. The other thing is, too, you see the motor wires, you see how I put them on, or the battery wires. See how I solder them on top? That's because you don't have a big enough through hole to fit an 18 gauge through. And I'm not going to just solder the 18 gauge down to the bottom and have that pull or lift pads off. I'm going to put it up top and route it down so that it's got a little bit more, it's a little anchored a little better, less likely, for it to just pull straight through. But with it, the two different motor leads they put in, they didn't put this one. I have a GNB 27 on here. They put one in with an XT30 with 18 gauge, so that 18 gauge does not fit through the through holes on the board. The only thing that fits is they put in a pigtail with like a 22 gauge with a PH2. That 22 gauge, yes, you can put it through here, but really, are you really going to be doing 22 gauge when you got to fly this on 2S, really, to get any kind of performance out of it? I don't know. So that's bizarre. Now, on this 1 to 2S question and what the point of this board is, I'm going to jump over to Flywoo's website, and I don't know, we'll go through some of the details that they list there, and you be the judge. You take a look at their descriptions, and you tell me whether you think that this is a 1 to 2S Whoop style board, or is it some weird niche 2S board for open prop builds. But if it's for open prop builds, it's a mess. The layout's a mess. I don't know. Okay, to the computer. All right, well, let's take a look at the Flywoo website, and you tell me. You tell me whether you think this is a 1S to 2S board or a 2S board. So big label up here, 2S, and big label over here, 2S, F405 2S. Okay, which is kind of funny when you're thinking about a board that definitely has a Whoop layout. I mean, it's just, it would be odd to have like a very Whoop-oriented board that is not 1S. That's just my take on it. But the reason I think this would be a 1 to 2S board is when we go into the descriptions, when we go into the description, this is pretty prominent. This is not like buried down. This is right at the top of the description. 1 to 2S 12 amp ESC. Okay. And then when we go into description over here, again, 1 to 2S. Input voltage, 1 to 2S. So we've got several mentions of 1 to 2S. It's not just 2S that they're talking about. And then when we go into the diagram, again, let's make this smaller. So the big labels are 2S, but when we go into the smaller descriptions, again, we've got the input voltage listed as 1 to 2S. We've got the ESC as a 1S to 2S. And when we look at the battery here, they've got that labeled as 1 to 2S. So, I don't know. Are you supposed to take that as a 2S, or is this a 1 to 2S? I don't know. Kind of strange. The other part that's strange to me and kind of makes me feel like this is a board designed by people checking boxes rather than by people actually building and flying these things, is because of this. If we look at where are they going to implement this board, where they're implementing it is not in a Whoop. They're implementing it in these little Fireflies that they're building. So in this case, Firefly Nano Baby. And I think they realize what they want to do here is they want to carry some of the HD stuff, whether you're doing, what are they doing? I think they're, whether it's like walk snail or I don't know what they're intending it for. So yeah, they're saying have versions for analog, DJI, walk snail, and HD0. Out of those, really, would you put anything heavier than HD0? I mean, this thing's going to struggle with HD0 all by itself. But anyways, what's so strange about that is that this is not a Whoop. So, one of my biggest frustrations with the build is that the motor wires are really inconvenient to solder from the side and really should be soldered from the bottom. But that doesn't work with these types of open prop builds. So, I don't know. Bizarre things. Definitely making me feel like unless this board does something amazing on the 2S like 1202.5 builds, I really don't see this board being worth it because of the quality of life, and it doesn't do 1S. So at $100, yeah, it looks great on paper, but I don't think it's bringing enough to the table to be worth it. But I don't know. We'll try it out. I felt like I had to give it a try. I did not have high expectations of it because of my prior experience with the prior Versatile board. I've had really good results with the Gokus, the regular 2 to 3S or 2 to 4S or whatever they are, the F411s with the 13 amp ESCs. I've had those. They're all solid. They're still flying. They're all like, I don't know, a couple of them are now like 3 years old and they're still flying. But this one is getting more and more frustrating the more I think about it. I better stop talking about it before I just start straight up ranting. All right. Till next time. Cheers.